How much of your life have you given away? Not your time, not your money, your actual life, your choices, your dreams, your identity. How much of who you are has been shaped by what others might think? I'm not asking this hypothetically. I'm asking you, right now, the career path you chose, the relationships you've maintained, the things you say yes to when you want to say no, the dreams you've buried because someone said they weren't realistic, all of it filtered through one relentless question. What will they think? If you're honest with yourself, you'll realize something uncomfortable. You're not living your life. You're performing it. And the audience, they're not even watching. They're too busy performing their own lives, worried about what you think of them. This is the invisible prison. No bars, no walls you can see, just an internal guard that monitors every thought, filters every decision, and evaluates every action through the lens of external approval. And the cruelest part? You built this prison yourself. Every time you sacrificed what you wanted for what others expected, you added another brick. I know because I lived in this prison for years. I remember the exact moment I realized I was trapped. I was 28 years old, sitting in a corner office at a prestigious law firm, wearing a suit that felt like a costume, about to attend a meeting I didn't care about. On paper, I was successful. Good salary, respected position, the kind of career my parents were proud to tell their friends about. And I wanted to scream, not because the job was terrible, but because it wasn't mine. None of it was mine. I had chosen this path because it's what smart, ambitious people were supposed to do. I had built this entire life around meeting expectations, parents, teachers, peers, society, and somewhere along the way, I completely lost sight of what I actually wanted. That night, I asked myself a question that changed everything. If no one would ever know, if there were no social consequences whatsoever, what would I do with my life? The answer that came wasn't the one I was living. Not even close. That gap between who I was and who I'd be if I was free, that was the measure of my prison. This book is about breaking free from that prison, not through some magical formula or quick fix, but through understanding exactly how the prison was built, why it's so difficult to escape, and what specific steps you need to take to reclaim your life. We'll explore the psychology of approval addiction, how it forms, why it persists, what it costs you. We'll examine the specific patterns people fall into. The people pleaser, the perfectionist, competitor. We'll look at how this trap manifests in every area of life: career, relationships, identity, purpose. And most importantly, we'll develop practical frameworks for building a life based on internal values rather than external validation. This isn't a book about becoming selfish or not caring about anyone. It's about the difference between living according to your own values while maintaining meaningful connections versus deriving your entire sense of worth from others' opinions, between choosing connection and needing validation, between giving from abundance and giving from desperation. If you apply these principles, not just understand them intellectually, but actually practice them, your life will change. Fundamentally, because when you stop living for external validation, you access energy and clarity you didn't know you had. Decisions become simpler. Relationships become healthier. Work becomes more meaningful. Life becomes yours. But I need to be honest, this journey is uncomfortable. Breaking free means facing disapproval. Setting boundaries means disappointing people. Living authentically means some people won't like you. That's hard. Really hard. There will be moments when going back to performing feels safer than continuing to be real. But on the other side of that discomfort is freedom most people never experience. So here's where we stand. You can close this book right now and go back to your life. Keep performing. Keep seeking approval. It's easier, safer. Or you can keep reading. Commit to this journey. Face the uncomfortable truths. Develop the courage to be disliked. Build a life that's genuinely yours. The choice is yours. It always has been. The question is, what will you choose now? If you're ready, turn the page. Your liberation begins with understanding exactly how you got imprisoned in the first place. Chapter 1. The Psychology of Approval Addiction. When was the last time you made a major decision without considering what others would think? Not a small decision. A real one. Career. Relationship. Life direction. When was the last time you chose something purely because you wanted it, with zero concern for how it would be perceived? If you're struggling to answer, that's not a coincidence. It's a symptom. You're addicted to approval. And like most addicts, you probably don't even realize you're using. The term addiction might sound extreme, but consider the definition. A compulsive need for a substance or behavior, continued despite harmful consequences. Now apply that to approval. Do you compulsively seek validation from others? Do you continue seeking it even though it makes you anxious and exhausted? Do you structure your life around gaining acceptance? If yes, then approval isn't just something you like. It's something you're dependent on. The birth of the addiction. You weren't born this way. No baby worries about others' opinions. Watch a toddler. They do exactly what they want. They cry when upset. They dance when happy. They say exactly what they think. They're completely, unselfconsciously themselves. Then something happens. Society teaches them this isn't acceptable. Parents say be good and make me proud. Teachers give grades and gold stars. Peers create social hierarchies. Slowly, systematically, the message embeds. Your worth depends on others' approval. Psychologist Alfred Adler called this the beginning of a lifestyle, a way of approaching life you choose because you believe it helps you reach your goals. For most people, the goal becomes be liked, be accepted, be approved of. Everything else flows from that. Every decision gets filtered through. Will this get approval or disapproval? The addiction forms through reinforcement. When you do something that gets approval, you feel a rush. Dopamine hits your brain. You feel validated, worthy, good. When you get disapproval, you feel pain. Anxiety spikes. Shame floods in. Over time, your brain learns. Approval equals good. Disapproval equals bad. Like any addiction, you start organizing your life around getting the next hit. The cruelest part? The people reinforcing this usually think they're helping. Parents believe they're teaching success. Teachers think they're motivating excellence. Friends think they're helping you fit in. Everyone acts with good intentions, but the result is the same. You learn that your worth is determined by external judgment, not internal values. By adulthood, this pattern is so deeply ingrained you don't notice it. It's just how life works. You make career choices based on what sounds impressive. You date people who look good to others. You buy things to signal status. You express opinions that won't offend. You perform constantly. And you have no idea because everyone around you is doing the same thing. The mechanics of the trap. Here's how the addiction works psychologically. Your brain has a fundamental need to be accepted by your social group. This made evolutionary sense. Being rejected from the tribe meant death. So humans evolved powerful mechanisms to detect and avoid social rejection. Shame, embarrassment, anxiety. These emotions kept you in line with group expectations, which kept you alive. But in the modern world, this mechanism is malfunctioning. You're no longer in a tribe where rejection means death. You're in a complex society where you interact with hundreds of people, most of whom don't actually matter to your survival. But your brain hasn't updated. It still treats disapproval like a life-threatening emergency. When someone criticizes you, your brain doesn't distinguish between my boss gave me feedback and the tribe is rejecting me. It triggers the same alarm. Cortisol floods your system. You feel anxious, threatened, defensive. Your rational brain knows this isn't dangerous, but your emotional brain is screaming that it is. This is why seeking approval feels so urgent. It's not just preference, it feels like survival. When your brain believes your survival depends on others' opinions, you'll do almost anything to gain approval and avoid disapproval. You'll sacrifice dreams. You'll betray values. You'll become someone you're not, all to keep the alarm bells from ringing. The addiction also works through intermittent reinforcement. You don't always get approval when you seek it. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. This unpredictability makes the addiction stronger. When a reward is unpredictable, you seek it more desperately. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. With approval, you occasionally get that hit. Someone praises you, validates your choice, accepts your proposal. That feels amazing, so you keep seeking it, even though most of the time you're either getting rejected or getting nothing at all. The intermittent wins keep the addiction alive. The two types of approval seekers. Not everyone seeks approval the same way. There are two main patterns. The performer seeks approval through achievement and image. They're driven, ambitious, often successful by conventional standards. They choose careers that impress people. They curate their social media carefully. They dress to signal status. Their entire life is a performance designed to generate admiration. The performer's addiction is obvious in their constant need for external validation. They check likes obsessively. They name drop. They compare themselves to others constantly. Their self-esteem rises and falls based on external metrics: salary, job title, follower count. What's less obvious is the emptiness underneath. The performer is so focused on the image that they lose touch with who they actually are beneath it. They've built an impressive facade, but there's no authentic self behind it. They're successful but unfulfilled, admired but alone. The people pleaser seeks approval through service and sacrifice. They're nice, accommodating, always available to help. They say yes when they want to say no. They prioritize others' needs over their own. They avoid conflict at all costs. Their life is organized around keeping others happy. The people pleaser's addiction is less obvious because it looks like kindness. But it's not kindness, it's fear. They're not serving because they genuinely want to help. They're serving because they're terrified of disapproval. Every yes is really, please don't reject me. Every sacrifice is really, please validate that I'm good. What's less obvious is the resentment underneath. The people pleaser gives constantly, but never receives what they really want: genuine acceptance for who they actually are. They give to get, but the getting never satisfies. So they become bitter, exhausted, resentful of the very people they're trying to please. Most people are some combination of both. You perform in some areas and people please in others. But recognizing which tendency is stronger helps you see how approval addiction manifests in your life. The cost of seeking approval. Let's be clear about what this addiction costs you. First, it costs you your freedom. When decisions are filtered through, what will others think? You're not free. You're a puppet. Others pull the strings through expectations, judgments, opinions. You move through the world, but you're not choosing your direction. Second, it costs you your identity. You become a chameleon, shifting personality based on who you're with. Work self, family self, friend self, social media self. But who are you actually? You have no idea because you've been performing so long you've forgotten there's supposed to be a real person underneath. Third, it costs you your relationships. When you're seeking approval, you can't form genuine connections. Genuine connection requires vulnerability, showing who you really are, flaws and all. But you can't do that when performing. So relationships stay superficial. You're surrounded by people, but completely alone because no one actually knows you. Fourth, it costs you your goals. You pursue goals that look impressive rather than goals that matter to you. You climb ladders only to discover they're leaning against the wrong building. You achieve success in things you don't care about and never attempt things you actually want because they don't meet other standards. Fifth, it costs you your peace. You're chronically anxious because approval is unstable. Someone who likes you today might judge you tomorrow. Standards keep changing. You can never relax because you are never truly safe from disapproval. You live in constant vigilance, monitoring how you're perceived, adjusting behavior, managing your image. It's exhausting. Sixth, it costs you your time. You spend countless hours on activities you don't enjoy because they're expected. Social obligations, professional networking, image maintenance, status signaling. Time you could spend on things that matter gets consumed by the performance. Add it up. Freedom, identity, relationships, goals, peace, time. What's left? What are you living for if everything is determined by others' opinions? The impossible standards. Here's another cruel aspect. The goalposts keep moving. You think, if I just achieve X, then I'll have earned approval and can relax. But it doesn't work that way. Say you believe success will bring approval. So you work hard, achieve a prestigious position, and some people do approve, but others don't. Your parents wanted something else. Your peers think you sold out. Your partner wishes you had more time. The approval you gained in one area cost you approval in another. So you think, I need to work harder, achieve more, be better. You add accomplishments, but the pattern continues. For every person who approves, someone else disapproves. And even people who approve today might disapprove tomorrow if circumstances change. This is because approval from others is conditional. It depends on meeting their specific expectations, which vary from person to person and change over time. Your parents' expectations differ from your peers, differ from societies, differ from your partners. There's no way to satisfy all of them simultaneously. Worse, many expectations contradict each other. Be ambitious, but not too ambitious. Be confident, but not arrogant. Be successful, but stay humble. Be independent, but don't isolate yourself. Be authentic, but don't be too weird. How do you navigate contradictory demands? You can't. The realization that hits hardest, even if you could somehow meet everyone's expectations perfectly, it still wouldn't make you happy. Because external validation is like junk food. It provides a brief hit, but no real nourishment. You get that dopamine rush when someone approves, but it fades quickly. Then you need another hit, and another. It never actually satisfies the deeper need, to feel worthy from the inside out. Why the addiction is so hard to break. If seeking approval costs so much and satisfies so little, why do people keep doing it? First, it's normalized. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. Your parents sought approval. Your friends seek approval. Your colleagues compete for recognition. It's not seen as a problem. It's seen as how life works. This makes it invisible. Second, it's reinforced constantly. Every social interaction potentially triggers the approval mechanism. Every meeting, every post, every conversation. You're getting tiny hits of validation or rejection dozens of times per day. This constant reinforcement keeps the addiction active. Third, breaking free feels dangerous. Remember, your brain treats disapproval like a survival threat. So when you consider living without seeking approval, your brain interprets this as you're going to get rejected and die. The fear is primal. Even though rationally you know you won't die, emotionally it feels life-threatening. Fourth, there's no clear alternative. Most people don't have a framework for living without seeking approval. They think the options are seek approval and be enslaved, or not care what anyone thinks and be an asshole. They don't realize there's a third option, living according to your own values, while accepting that some people won't approve. Fifth, the benefits are delayed. Breaking free requires short-term discomfort for long-term gain. You have to face disapproval, set boundaries, disappoint people. That hurts immediately. The freedom and authenticity come later. Most people aren't willing to endure short-term pain for long-term gain, especially when the pain triggers survival fears. This is why intellectual understanding isn't enough. You can read this, nod along, agree with everything, and still remain trapped. Breaking free requires more than understanding. It requires courage. The courage to face disapproval. The courage to disappoint people. The courage to be disliked. And that's what most people lack. The choice. You're at a crossroads. You can see the addiction now. You understand how it works. You know what it costs. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Some people will close this book and go back to seeking approval, but now consciously. They'll see themselves performing and think, I know I'm performing, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. That's their choice. At least it's conscious. Some will try to break free half-heartedly. They'll make small changes, set a few boundaries, say no occasionally. But when it gets uncomfortable, when people get upset, when disapproval comes, they'll retreat to the safety of approval seeking. They'll tell themselves, I tried, but it didn't work for me. And some, a rare few, will commit fully to liberation. They'll recognize that freedom requires facing everything they've been avoiding. Disapproval, disappointment, criticism, rejection. And they'll face it anyway because they've decided that living authentically matters more than being liked. Which one will you be? The rest of this book is for people in that third category. People who've decided freedom is worth the cost. People ready to break the addiction, not just understand it. If that's you, let's continue. Because understanding the addiction is just the first step. Next, we need to understand exactly what it's cost you in specific areas of your life. Career, relationships, identity, purpose. The approval addiction has infected every area. We need to see exactly how so you can begin reclaiming what you've lost. Chapter 2. The price you've paid. Let me tell you about the day I realized what living for others had cost me. I was 29 years old, sitting at a restaurant with my college roommate. We'd been close once, but life had pulled us in different directions. He'd become a teacher in a small town. I'd gone to law school, joined a prestigious firm, built what looked like success. Over dinner, he asked me a simple question. Are you happy? And I froze. Not because the answer was no, but because I realized I didn't actually know. I'd been so focused on checking boxes, right career, right apartment, right relationship, that I'd never stopped to ask myself if any of it made me happy. That night, I went home and made a list. On one side, everything I'd achieved. Impressive. On the other side, what I'd sacrificed to achieve it. The creative projects I'd abandoned because they weren't serious. The friendships I'd let fade because they didn't advance my career. The hobbies I'd given up because they didn't produce anything valuable. The parts of my personality I'd suppressed because they didn't fit the professional image. The list of sacrifices was longer, much longer. And that's when I understood. I hadn't built a life. I'd built a resume. An impressive one, yes. But where was the actual living? Where were the moments of genuine joy, unfiltered expression, authentic connection? I traded them all for approval, for the ability to say, I'm a lawyer, and watch people's impressed reactions. This is what living for others costs. Not just abstract concepts like freedom or authenticity. Concrete things, real things, things you can never get back. The career you didn't choose. Let's start with careers, because this is where the trap often manifests most obviously. Think about how you chose your career path. Did you sit down and think, what do I genuinely care about? What problems interest me? What work would I do even if no one paid me? Or did you think, what career gets respect? What path looks impressive? What job will make my parents proud? For most people, it's the latter. Career choices are made through the lens of external validation. You choose based on what sounds good at parties. You pick paths that impress people. You pursue titles that command respect. The result? Millions of people in careers they don't care about. Lawyers who hate law but love the prestige. Doctors who chose medicine to please parents. Consultants who find work meaningless but enjoy the status. Academics who are miserable but can't leave because they've invested so much. I know because I was one of them. I went to law school not because I was passionate about law. I barely knew what lawyers did, but because it was the respectable path. My parents were thrilled. My professors were proud. Society nodded approvingly. But from day one, I knew I'd made a mistake. The material was interesting intellectually, but didn't move me emotionally. I couldn't imagine doing this for 40 years. Yet I pushed through. Because I'd already told everyone this was my path. Because I'd invested time and money. Because lawyers sounded impressive, and I don't know what I once sounded like failure. So I graduated, took the bar, started at a firm, and spent every day feeling like I was suffocating. This is the career cost of approval seeking. You invest years or decades in work that doesn't align with what you care about. And because you've invested so much, leaving feels impossible. You're financially dependent on a salary. You need to maintain the lifestyle that signals success. You're identity locked into a professional role everyone sees you in. You're trapped by the very success you worked so hard to achieve. The saddest part? You might be objectively successful, prestigious position, good income, respected, and still feel empty. Because success in something you don't care about is just expensive emptiness. The relationships that aren't real. The approval trap doesn't just affect careers. It infects every relationship. Start with family. Your parents have expectations. Explicit ones or implicit ones. And because you love them, because you want them to be proud, you try to meet those expectations. The problem? Their expectations might not align with your values. They want stability. You want adventure. They value prestige. You value creativity. But you suppress your values to meet their expectations because you need their approval. This creates fundamental dishonesty. You're not showing them who you actually are. You're showing them who you think they want you to be. So even when they express pride, it doesn't fully land. Because they're proud of a performance, not the real you. I remember calling my parents after quitting law to pursue writing. The conversation was brutal. Concern, disappointment, fear. How will you support yourself? What about all those years of education? Are you sure you're making the right choice? What they were really asking, have we failed? Did we do something wrong? Why are you rejecting the path we thought would make you happy? What I heard, you're disappointing us. We're not proud anymore. You've lost our approval. That pain, that sense of losing parental approval, is primal, which is why so many people never break free. They'd rather live a life their parents approve of than face that disapproval. The approval trap is equally destructive in romantic relationships. Many people choose partners based partly on external validation. Does this person make me look good? Do my friends approve? Will my family like them? These aren't the only factors, but they influence choice more than people admit. You date the person who checks the boxes, attractive, successful, same background, even if the chemistry is mediocre. You stay in relationships that look good even when they feel wrong. You get married because it's time, according to social timelines. Worse, once in relationships, approval seeking shapes behavior. You perform the role of good partner. You suppress needs that might be inconvenient. You avoid difficult conversations. You present a curated version of yourself, not because you're deliberately lying, but because you need your partner's approval and fear the real you might not measure up. This prevents genuine intimacy. Real intimacy requires vulnerability, showing the messy, imperfect, sometimes unlovable parts. But when you're seeking approval, you can't risk that. What if they see your flaws and leave? So you maintain the performance, and the relationship stays surface level. You're together but alone, approved of but not known. Friendships suffer too. When approval is the goal, you collect friends based on how they make you look rather than genuine connection. You prioritize friendships with impressive people. You maintain relationships that have social value even when there's no real depth. You also censor yourself constantly. Can't be too weird, they might judge. Can't be too honest, might offend. Can't share real struggles, might seem weak. So conversations stay safe. Surface level. Pleasant but meaningless. Lots of friends, but no one who actually knows you. I had this realization at a party once. I was surrounded by people I'd known for years, people I regularly spent time with, and I suddenly realized, not one of them actually knew me. They knew the version I presented, successful, confident, put together, but they didn't know about my doubts, my fears, my actual thoughts and feelings, because I'd never shown them. The identity you lost. Beyond specific relationships, approval-seeking affects your fundamental sense of identity. Who are you? Most people can't answer this question clearly because they've spent so long being who others wanted them to be. Your identity becomes a collection of roles: son/daughter, student, employee, professional partner. You perform these roles well enough to gain approval. But underneath all the roles, who's the actual person? You don't know. You've been performing so long you've lost touch with the authentic self underneath. This shows up in strange ways. You can't answer simple questions like, what do you enjoy? Without filtering through, what should I enjoy? You don't know what you believe about important topics because you've always just agreed with whoever you're talking to. You can't make decisions without extensive consultation because you have no internal compass. I experienced this most acutely when I quit law and suddenly had open time. I remember sitting at a coffee shop thinking, what do I actually want to do right now? And I couldn't answer. Not because there weren't options, but because I'd never practiced answering that question honestly. I'd always asked, what should I do? Or what would be productive? I'd never just asked, what do I want? It took months to reconnect with authentic preferences, to learn to distinguish, I want this because I actually want it, from, I want this because I think I should want it. That's how deeply approval-seeking had infected my sense of self. This is the identity cost. You become a stranger to yourself. You're so focused on who you're supposed to be that you never develop a clear sense of who you actually are. And that absence creates a vague but persistent emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill. The purpose you never found. Perhaps the deepest cost is purpose. When you're living for others' approval, you can't pursue genuine purpose. Because purpose isn't about meeting expectations. It's about contribution that emerges from your authentic values and abilities. Think about people who clearly have purpose. They're doing work that matters to them. Not necessarily prestigious work. Not always lucrative work. But work that aligns with who they are and what they care about. That alignment creates meaning that external validation can never provide. But when you're approval-seeking, you can't access that. Your energy goes to maintaining images, meeting expectations, gaining validation. You might achieve things that look purposeful, successful career, charitable contributions, respected position, but they don't create internal meaning because they're not actually yours. You're performing purpose rather than living it. I see this clearly in people who've achieved traditional success, but feel empty. They've climbed the ladder, gained the approval, achieved the markers, and they don't understand why it feels hollow. I have everything I'm supposed to want. Why am I still unhappy? Because approval-driven achievement isn't the same as purposeful living. One is about external validation. The other is about internal alignment. And no amount of the first will satisfy the need for the second. The purpose cost is particularly tragic because it's invisible to the person living it. You can spend decades chasing approval-based goals without realizing you're avoiding the deeper question. What am I here to do that only I can do? Not what looks good. Not what brings approval. What actually matters to me? Most people never ask that question because they're too busy meeting expectations. And they reach the end of their lives having built an impressive resume, but never actually lived purposefully. Successful but not fulfilled. Approved of but not aligned. The present moment you're missing. There's one more cost, subtle but devastating. You miss your life as it's happening. When you are constantly monitoring how you're perceived, you're not actually present. You're in your head, worried, planning, performing, missing the actual moment. You're at dinner with friends, but not really there because you're thinking about how you're coming across. You're at your kid's game, but mentally preparing for tomorrow's presentation. You're on vacation, but posting photos to show everyone what a great time you're having instead of actually having it. Life becomes something you document rather than experience. Something you perform rather than live. You're so focused on how things look from the outside that you never feel them from the inside. I remember being at a beautiful location. I don't even remember where. Taking photos for Instagram. Thinking about captions. Considering filters. And suddenly I thought, I'm not even seeing this. I'm just creating evidence that I saw it. That's when it hit me. I'd been living life as performance to be documented rather than experience to be felt. The total cost. Add it all up. Career you don't care about. Relationships lacking intimacy. Identity you didn't choose. Purpose you never found. Present moments you're missing. Freedom traded for illusion of security. This is what living for others costs. Not just stress or anxiety. The real cost is your actual life. The one life you get. The years that pass while you're performing. The authentic self that never gets expressed. The genuine connections that never form. The purpose that never manifests. And for what? For approval that's conditional, unstable, and ultimately unsatisfying. For validation that lasts only until the next time you fail to meet expectations. For acceptance based on a performance rather than who you actually are. It's a terrible trade. Yet millions make it. Not because they're stupid, but because they don't realize there's an alternative. For most people, there's a moment when the cost becomes unbearable. Sometimes it's a crisis. Health scare, divorce, death. Something that forces perspective. Sometimes it's gradual. Slow accumulation of compromises until you wake up one day and barely recognize yourself. Sometimes it's a single moment of clarity. You're in the middle of performing and suddenly you see yourself from outside. You see how exhausting it is. How empty. How unsustainable. For me, it was a combination. The growing sense that something was wrong. The mounting evidence that external success wasn't creating internal satisfaction. The accumulating costs. Until finally, sitting in that office, I couldn't maintain the illusion anymore. That's when the real choice appears. Continue the performance until it destroys you. Or break free even though breaking free is terrifying. Most people choose continuation. Because breaking free means facing everything they've been avoiding. But some choose freedom, not because they're braver, but because they've calculated the costs honestly and realized, staying in this prison will destroy me faster than facing disapproval will. If you're reading this and resonating, you might be at that breaking point. The costs have accumulated. The performance is exhausting. The emptiness is growing. And you're starting to wonder, isn't there another way? There is. But the path requires understanding the specific patterns that keep people trapped. Not everyone seeks approval the same way. Different patterns, different traps. Understanding your pattern is essential to breaking free. That's where we're going next. Chapter 3. The People Pleaser Pattern. I just want everyone to be happy. How many times have you said that? Or thought it? It sounds noble, selfless, kind. But let me ask you something. When you say, I want everyone to be happy, what you really mean is, I need everyone to not be upset with me. That's not kindness. That's fear. The people pleaser is perhaps the most common and most misunderstood pattern of approval seeking. It's misunderstood because it looks like virtue. You're helpful, accommodating, always available. You put others first. Society praises these qualities. What a nice person, they say. So selfless, so giving. But underneath the performance of niceness is a desperate need for approval masquerading as compassion. You're not saying yes because you genuinely want to help. You're saying yes because you're terrified of the disapproval that might come if you say no. Every act of service is really a transaction. I'll meet your needs so you won't reject me. I know this pattern intimately because I lived it for years. I was the friend who would drop everything to help, the colleague who would take on extra work, the family member who would attend every obligation. I thought I was being a good person, but really, I was being a coward. I was so afraid of disapproval that I'd sacrifice anything, my time, my energy, my needs, to avoid it. The breaking point came when a friend asked me to help them move, for the third time in a year. On a weekend I'd blocked off for a personal project I'd been postponing for months, and I said yes, immediately, without hesitation, not because I wanted to help, but because I couldn't tolerate the discomfort of saying no. After that move, driving home exhausted, I realized I wasn't helping people. I was using them, using their needs to get something I desperately wanted, approval. And in the process, I completely abandoned myself. The anatomy of people-pleasing. Let's break down how this pattern works. At its core, people-pleasing is a strategy for managing anxiety. Specifically, the anxiety that comes from potential disapproval. Your brain has learned, when others are happy with you, you feel safe. When others are unhappy with you, you feel threatened. So you organize your entire life around keeping others happy. This manifests in several specific behaviors. First, you have extreme difficulty saying no. Someone asks for a favor, and even though you don't have time, even though you don't want to, even though it will cost you significantly, you say yes. Not because you're generous, because the discomfort of saying no and dealing with potential disappointment is more painful than the cost of saying yes. Second, you constantly prioritize others' needs over your own. Not occasionally, constantly. You have needs, wants, preferences. But the moment someone else expresses a need that conflicts with yours, you automatically defer to theirs. Your needs become invisible, unimportant, not worthy of consideration. Third, you avoid conflict at all costs. Someone says something that bothers you. You stay silent. Someone crosses a boundary. You don't address it. Someone treats you poorly. You make excuses for them. Anything to avoid the confrontation that might lead to disapproval. Fourth, you constantly seek reassurance. After every interaction, you replay it in your mind. Did they seem upset? Did I say something wrong? Are they mad at me? You text follow-ups. You apologize preemptively. You need constant confirmation that you haven't lost their approval. Fifth, you struggle with guilt. Anytime you do something for yourself, especially if it disappoints someone else, you feel crushing guilt. You've internalized the message that your needs don't matter, that prioritizing yourself is selfish. that good people sacrifice for others. The hidden costs. The people-pleaser pattern might look harmless, but it costs you enormously. First, it costs you your time. You spend countless hours doing things you don't want to do for people you don't even particularly like. Every yes to someone else is a no to yourself. Every favor you don't want to do is time stolen from things that actually matter to you. Second, it costs you your energy. Constantly managing others' emotions is exhausting. Monitoring everyone's mood. Adjusting your behavior to keep them comfortable. Walking on eggshells. By the end of the day, you're depleted. Not from doing meaningful work, from performing niceness. Third, it costs you your relationships. This sounds paradoxical. How can being nice damage relationships? But here's the thing. People-pleasing prevents genuine connection, because you never show your real self. You never express authentic preferences. You never voice disagreements. So no one actually knows you. They know the accommodating, agreeable version, not the real person underneath. The relationships you build as a people-pleaser are fundamentally dishonest. You're pretending to be okay with things you're not okay with. You're suppressing your real reactions. You're performing agreement to maintain harmony, and the other person has no idea. They think everything's fine. They think you're genuinely happy. They don't realize you're secretly resentful, because that's the fourth cost, resentment. It builds slowly. You say yes when you want to say no. You accommodate when you want to assert. You give when you don't want to give. And each time, a little bit of resentment accumulates. You start to feel used, taken advantage of, unappreciated, and you blame others. After all I've done for them, they don't even care. But here's the truth. They don't know. You never told them. You never expressed your limits. You never said, actually, I can't do that, or I need something different. You trained them to treat you this way by accepting it, and now you're bitter about it. Fifth, it costs you respect, both from others and yourself. Others don't respect you because you don't respect yourself. When you have no boundaries, when you always defer, when you never assert yourself, people lose respect. Not consciously, but they start to see you as someone whose needs don't matter, someone they can ask anything of, someone who will always fold. And you lose self-respect. Because every time you betray your own needs, you're sending yourself a message. What I want doesn't matter. What I need isn't important. Other people are more valuable than I am. Over time, this destroys your sense of self-worth. Why you can't stop? If people-pleasing costs so much, why can't you stop? Because it's serving a function. It's protecting you from something you fear even more than the costs, disapproval. The people-pleaser has a core belief. If people see my real needs and preferences, they'll reject me. This belief often forms in childhood. Maybe your parents were unpredictable, happy when you pleased them, angry when you didn't. Maybe you had a sibling who got all the attention, and you learned that being helpful got you noticed. Maybe you were criticized whenever you asserted yourself. Whatever the origin, you internalized a message. Your worth depends on how much you give. Your value is in your usefulness. Your right to exist is conditional on meeting others' needs. And that belief drives the pattern. When someone asks you for something, you experience anxiety. Not about the actual request. About what might happen if you say no. Your brain runs a catastrophic scenario. If I say no, they'll be upset. If they're upset, they'll think I'm selfish. If they think I'm selfish, they'll reject me. If they reject me, I'll be alone. This happens in milliseconds. You don't consciously think through this chain. You just feel the anxiety spike. And saying yes makes the anxiety go away. Immediately. That's the reinforcement. Say yes, anxiety reduces. Your brain learns. Saying yes is safe. Saying no is dangerous. The pattern also persists because it occasionally works. Sometimes, being helpful does get you appreciation. Sometimes, sacrificing does get you validation. Sometimes, people-pleasing does prevent conflict. These intermittent reinforcements keep the pattern alive. You think, see, it works. I need to keep doing this. But you don't see the bigger pattern, that the appreciation is shallow, that the validation doesn't actually satisfy your deeper need. That avoiding conflict means never having real resolution. You're so focused on the immediate anxiety relief that you miss the long-term costs. The breaking point. For most people-pleasers, there's a moment when the pattern becomes unsustainable. Often, it's when you experience a significant boundary violation. Someone asks for something so unreasonable that even you can see it's too much, but you've trained them to expect yes. So when you finally, hesitantly say no, they react badly. They get angry. They accuse you of changing. They withdraw affection. And you realize the approval you've been working so hard to maintain was always conditional. They didn't actually value you. They valued what you did for them. The moment you stopped performing, the relationship crumbled. All those years of sacrifice, and it meant nothing. That's when the resentment erupts. All the accumulated bitterness comes flooding out. You realize how much you've given up, how little you've received, how one-sided these relationships have been, and you're furious. At them, at yourself, at the entire pattern. This is actually progress, because anger is better than compliance. Resentment, uncomfortable as it is your authentic self finally speaking up. It's saying, this isn't okay. I matter too. My needs count. The challenge is channeling that anger into healthy change rather than bitter withdrawal. Some people-pleasers respond by swinging to the opposite extreme. They become harsh, rigid. They cut people off entirely. They build walls. This is understandable, but not sustainable, because you're still letting others control you. Now through anger rather than fear. Real freedom isn't found in reaction. It's found in conscious choice. The path to healthy boundaries. Breaking the people-pleasing pattern requires developing something you've never had. Healthy boundaries. Not walls. Walls keep everyone out. Not doors. Doors let everyone in. Boundaries are like fences with gates. They define what's yours. They protect your space. But they have controlled entry points where you can choose connection. Healthy boundaries mean you understand that your needs matter as much as anyone else's. Not more. You're not becoming selfish. But not less, which is what people-pleasing implies. Equal. Your time is valuable. Your energy is finite. Your comfort matters. You have the right to say no without justification. This feels impossible when you first try it. Saying no triggers massive anxiety. Your brain screams danger. You feel guilty. Selfish. Mean. This is normal. Your brain has been wired to see boundary setting as threat. It takes time and practice to rewire it. Start small. Practice saying no to low-stakes requests. Someone asks if you want to go somewhere you don't want to go, say no. Not with excuses. Not with extensive justification. Just, no, that doesn't work for me. Notice the anxiety. Let it be there. Don't let it control you. What you'll discover, most people respond better than you expect. They might be slightly disappointed, but they move on. They don't reject you. They don't end the relationship. They just accept it. Because functional people understand that no is a complete answer. Some people won't respond well. They'll push back. They'll guilt trip. They'll act hurt. This is actually valuable information. It reveals who was in relationship with you versus who was in relationship with what you could do for them. The ones who respect your boundaries are worth keeping. The ones who don't, were they ever really there for you? You'll also need to address the guilt. The people-pleaser feels crushing guilt whenever they prioritize themselves. This guilt is based on a lie. that your needs don't matter as much as others. Challenge this lie. Ask yourself, if my friend was in this situation, would I want them to sacrifice themselves, or would I want them to take care of themselves? Usually, you'd want your friend to have boundaries, to prioritize their well-being, to not sacrifice themselves for others' convenience. Extend that same compassion to yourself. You deserve the same boundaries you'd want for people you love. The transformation. What happens when you break free from people-pleasing? First, your relationships improve. Not all of them, some will end, but the ones that remain become more authentic, because you're finally showing up as yourself, with real preferences, real limits, real authenticity, and the people who stay are connecting with the real you, not the performance. Second, you gain respect, both from others and yourself. When you have boundaries, when you can say no, when you prioritize your needs appropriately, people respect that. They see someone who values themselves, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. Third, you access energy you didn't know you had. All that energy you were spending on performing niceness, it's now available for things that actually matter. Your relationships take less effort because they're authentic. Your time is freed up because you're not doing things you don't want to do. Your mental space clears because you're not constantly monitoring everyone's emotions. Fourth, the resentment dissolves. Not immediately. You might have accumulated years of bitterness, but gradually, as you start honoring your needs, the resentment has less to feed on. You're no longer in patterns where you're giving more than you want to give, so there's nothing to resent. Fifth, you discover who you actually are. For years, you've been whoever others needed you to be. Helpful, accommodating, nice. But underneath that performance, who are you? What do you actually want? What matters to you when you're not trying to please someone? Breaking free from people-pleasing lets you find out. The transformation isn't easy. You'll face pushback. Some people will be upset. Some relationships will end. You'll feel guilty. You'll question if you're being selfish. You'll want to go back to the old pattern because it's familiar and the new one is uncomfortable. But here's what I can promise. On the other side of that discomfort is freedom. The freedom to be yourself, to have needs, to express limits, to form genuine connections, to live according to your own values rather than constantly accommodating others. That freedom is worth every uncomfortable moment it takes to get there. Chapter 4, The Perfectionist Prison. Let me tell you about perfect. Perfect is a prison disguised as a palace. Perfect looks like excellence, like high standards, like doing things right. But perfect is actually just another form of approval seeking. You're not pursuing excellence for its own sake. You're pursuing it to avoid criticism, to gain admiration, to prove your worth to others and yourself. I know this because I spent years as a perfectionist. I didn't realize that's what it was. I thought I had high standards. I thought I valued quality. I told myself I was just committed to doing my best. But underneath all that rationalization was fear. Terror, actually. The fear that if anything I did wasn't perfect, people would see the truth, that I wasn't good enough. The perfectionist pattern is particularly insidious because it's socially rewarded. You get praised for attention to detail, for thorough work, for never cutting corners. People call you reliable, excellent, high-performing. You achieve things. You succeed by conventional metrics, which makes it hard to see that you're actually trapped in an exhausting, unsustainable pattern driven by approval addiction. The anatomy of perfectionism. Perfectionism isn't about excellence. Excellence is the pursuit of being really good at something that matters to you. Perfectionism is the pursuit of being flawless to avoid criticism. They look similar from the outside, but the internal experience is completely different. The person pursuing excellence feels challenged and engaged. They're working toward a meaningful goal. They enjoy the process. They can accept mistakes as part of learning. They know when something is good enough and can move on. The perfectionist feels anxious and driven. They're working to avoid failure. They dread the process because it's fraught with opportunities to fall short. They can't accept mistakes because mistakes prove they're deficient. They can never reach good enough because the standard keeps moving. Perfectionism manifests in several specific ways. First, you have impossibly high standards. Not just high, impossible. You expect yourself to never make mistakes, to always know the right answer, to produce work that has no flaws whatsoever. And when you inevitably fall short, because humans are fallible, you experience crushing self-criticism. Second, you procrastinate significantly. This seems paradoxical. Shouldn't perfectionists start early and work constantly? But procrastination is actually a core part of the pattern. You avoid starting because starting means facing the possibility of not doing it perfectly. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right time, the right inspiration, the right conditions. Really, you're avoiding the anxiety. Third, you experience paralysis around decisions. What if you choose wrong? What if there's a better option you're missing? What if you make a mistake? So you research endlessly, weigh every option, seek input from multiple people, and still feel uncertain because no choice is perfect. Fourth, you have extreme difficulty completing things. You get 90% done and then obsess over that final 10%. You revise endlessly. You add complications. You can't let go because it's not perfect yet, which means projects that should take days take weeks, or never get finished at all. Fifth, you beat yourself up constantly. Your internal dialogue is harsh, critical, unforgiving. Every mistake is evidence of fundamental deficiency. Every criticism, real or imagined, confirms you're not good enough. You would never speak to another person the way you speak to yourself. The hidden function. Why do people become perfectionists? It's not because they love excellence. It's because perfectionism serves a function. It protects them from a thing they fear most, which is being seen as inadequate. The perfectionist has internalized a core belief. I am only valuable if I'm perfect. Any flaw, any mistake, any shortcoming means I'm worthless. This belief often forms in childhood. Maybe you had parents who were very critical. Maybe you had a sibling who was naturally talented, and you had to work twice as hard to get noticed. Maybe you learned early that mistakes resulted in punishment or withdrawal of love. Whatever the origin, you learned. Your worth is conditional. You're only acceptable if you meet extremely high standards, and anything less than perfect is unacceptable. This belief creates enormous anxiety because it's an impossible standard. You can never actually be perfect, which means you're in constant danger of being exposed as worthless. Perfectionism attempts to manage this anxiety through control. If you can just be perfect, if you can just never make mistakes, never show flaws, never fall short, then you'll be safe from criticism, rejection, unworthiness. The anxiety drives you to work harder, longer, more carefully. You check and recheck. You revise endlessly. You refuse to let anything out into the world until it's flawless. But here's the trap. Perfectionism doesn't actually make you feel more secure. It makes you more anxious. Because the standard keeps moving. You achieve something you thought would prove your worth, and your brain immediately raises the bar. That was good, but could have been better? You're never safe. Never enough. Never done proving yourself. The pattern also persists because it occasionally gets rewarded. Sometimes, your perfectionism does result in excellent work. Sometimes, people do praise your attention to detail. Sometimes, your thoroughness does prevent mistakes. These reinforcements keep the pattern alive. You think, see, perfectionism works. I need to maintain these standards. But you don't see what it's costing you. The hours lost to unnecessary revision. The opportunities missed because you were too afraid to try unless you could guarantee perfect results. The joy drained from activities because you can't do them unless you can excel. The relationships damaged because you hold others to impossible standards too. The cost of perfect. The perfectionist pattern costs you enormously. First, it costs you time. Massive amounts of time. Time spent on unnecessary revision. Time spent researching instead of doing. Time spent procrastinating because you're anxious. Time spent worrying about whether you did something perfectly. Hours and hours that could have been spent on meaningful work, enjoyable activities, genuine connection. Second, it costs you opportunities. You don't try new things because you might not be immediately good at them. You don't take risks because you might fail. You don't put yourself out there because you might be criticized. So you stay in your lane. You stick with what you know. You play it safe. And you miss out on growth, adventure, possibility. I realized this when I wanted to learn to paint. I'd always been interested, but I never started because I knew I wouldn't be good at first. And if I wasn't good, what was the point? Years passed. I kept wanting to paint, but never began because I couldn't tolerate being a beginner. How many experiences have I missed because I wouldn't do them unless I could do them perfectly? Third, it costs you relationships. Perfectionism doesn't stay contained to your work. It bleeds into how you relate to others. You become critical of their mistakes, impatient with their flaws, judgmental of their choices, not because you're mean, but because you hold them to the same impossible standards you hold yourself to. Also, you can't be vulnerable. Vulnerability means showing imperfection, and perfectionists can't do that. So relationships stay surface level. People see your achievements, but never your struggles. Your competence, but never your doubts. You're impressive, but not relatable. Admired, but not close. Fourth, it costs you joy. Perfectionism kills joy because joy requires accepting imperfection. Joy comes from doing things you love, even if you're not good at them. From trying even if you might fail. From creating even if it's flawed. But the perfectionist can't access joy. Everything is filtered through, am I doing this well enough? There's no room for playfulness, experimentation, or simple enjoyment. Fifth, it costs you completion. Perfectionists have countless unfinished projects. Because nothing is ever good enough to release. You start things with enthusiasm, but as you work, you see all the flaws, all the ways it falls short. So you keep revising, or you abandon it entirely. Either way, you never experience the satisfaction of completion. Sixth, it costs you health. The constant anxiety, the harsh self-criticism, the chronic stress of trying to be perfect. It takes a physical toll. Headaches, stomach problems, insomnia. Your body is in constant activation mode. There's no rest, no ease, just perpetual tension. The breaking point. For most perfectionists, there's a moment when the pattern becomes unsustainable. Often, it's when you experience a failure you can't rationalize away. Something goes wrong despite your best efforts. You make a mistake that gets noticed. You fall short in a way you can't hide. Your perfectionism told you this would be catastrophic. That failure would prove you're worthless. That people would reject you. But then it happens, and you survive. People don't reject you. The world doesn't end. And you realize, the thing you've been desperately trying to avoid isn't actually as devastating as your perfectionism convinced you it would be. Or sometimes, the breaking point is burnout. You've been running on the perfectionism treadmill for so long that you simply collapse. You can't maintain the standards anymore. Your body gives out. Your mind shuts down. And in that collapse, you're forced to confront the unsustainability of the pattern. For me, the breaking point came when I missed a deadline. I'd never missed a deadline before. Never. But I'd been revising a project endlessly, trying to make it perfect, and I simply ran out of time. I submitted something imperfect, and I was terrified, convinced this would ruin my reputation, that I'd be seen as a fraud. But nothing happened. The client was fine with it. No one seemed to notice or care that it wasn't perfect, and I realized I'd been torturing myself for standards that existed only in my head. All that anxiety, all that revision, all that lost time for something that didn't actually matter to anyone but me. The path to healthy excellence. Breaking the perfectionist pattern requires distinguishing between perfectionism and excellence. They're not the same thing. Perfectionism is fear-driven. Excellence is value-driven. Perfectionism is about avoiding failure. Excellence is about pursuing quality in things that matter. Here's the key question. Why am I pursuing this standard? If the answer is because I'm afraid of criticism/judgment/being seen as inadequate, that's perfectionism. If the answer is because this is something I genuinely care about and want to do well, that's excellence. Excellence says, I'm going to work hard on this because it matters to me. Perfectionism says, I have to be perfect at this or I'm worthless. Excellence can accept good enough. Perfectionism never can. Breaking the pattern requires several specific shifts. First, you need to challenge the core belief. The belief that your worth is conditional on perfection. This belief is a lie. Your worth is inherent. You don't have to earn it. You can't lose it. You're valuable as a human being regardless of your achievements or failures. Start collecting evidence against the belief. Notice times when you made mistakes and people still valued you. Times when you did something imperfectly and it was still worthwhile. Times when someone else made a mistake and you didn't think less of them. Your brain has been filtering out this evidence. Start paying attention to it. Second, you need to practice good enough. This is agonizing for perfectionists. Your brain will scream that good enough isn't acceptable, but you need to prove to yourself that good enough is actually fine. Choose low-stakes projects and deliberately do them at 80% instead of 100%. Notice that the world doesn't end, that people don't reject you, that good enough is often actually good enough. Third, you need to separate your worth from your performance. You are not your achievements. You are not your output. You are not your productivity. You are a human being with inherent value. Your worth doesn't fluctuate based on how well you do things. Practice this mantra. I am valuable whether I succeed or fail. Fourth, you need to practice self-compassion. The harsh self-criticism has to stop. It's not motivating you to excellence. It's paralyzing you with fear. When you make a mistake, talk to yourself the way you talk to a friend, with kindness, understanding, encouragement, not harsh judgment. Fifth, you need to embrace beginner's mind. Allow yourself to be bad at things. Try activities you have no aptitude for. Be deliberately mediocre. This rewires your brain's association between worth and performance. You learn viscerally that you can survive, even enjoy being imperfect. The transformation. What happens when you break free from perfectionism? First, you gain time. All those hours previously lost to unnecessary revision, procrastination driven by anxiety, and excessive preparation, suddenly available. You complete things faster. You start more projects. You actually finish what you start. Second, you gain opportunities. You try new things. You take risks. You put yourself out there. Because you're no longer paralyzed by fear of imperfection. Some things won't work out. That's fine. You're learning that failure isn't catastrophic. It's just information. Third, your relationships improve. You become less critical, more accepting, more human. People can relax around you because you're not judging them against impossible standards. and you can finally be vulnerable, which creates real intimacy. Fourth, you find joy. You can do things just because they're fun. Paint badly. Dance poorly. Try cooking without following a recipe perfectly. There's lightness, playfulness, joy that's been absent from your life. Fifth, you develop resilience. Because you're no longer avoiding failure. You're not devastated by it. You make mistakes and bounce back. You take risks and handle the outcomes. You build genuine confidence, not the fragile kind that depends on perfect performance, but the robust kind that knows you can handle whatever happens. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. You'll still have perfectionist impulses. You'll still hear that critical voice. But gradually, you learn to recognize it for what it is. Fear masquerading as standards. And you can choose differently. Choose good enough. Choose completion over perfection. Choose living over performing. Chapter 5. The Competitor's Trap. How often do you compare yourself to others? Not occasionally, constantly. Scrolling social media, seeing what others have achieved, and feeling either superior or inferior. At work, tracking who gets promoted, who gets praised, who gets the project you wanted. In social situations, noting who's funnier, more attractive, more successful. Your life has become a constant competition where everyone else is simultaneously your rival and your measuring stick. This is the competitor pattern, and it's one of the most exhausting forms of approval seeking because it never ends. There's always someone ahead of you, always someone doing better, always someone to envy or resent. You can never relax because relaxing means someone else is getting ahead. I lived this pattern for years without recognizing it. I thought I was just ambitious, driven, competitive in a healthy way. But really, I was trapped in a zero-sum mindset where other people's success felt like my failure. Every peer's achievement was a personal threat. Every friend's happiness highlighted my dissatisfaction. I couldn't genuinely celebrate anyone because I was too busy calculating how their win affected my relative position. The breaking point came at a friend's celebration dinner. They'd just gotten a major promotion. Everyone was congratulating them, and I was sitting there smiling, saying the right things, but internally seething. Not because I wasn't happy for them, but because their success made me feel like a loser. And I realized, I've turned my entire life into a competition I can never win. The anatomy of competition. The competitor pattern is rooted in a specific belief. Worth is relative. You're not valuable in absolute terms. You're only valuable compared to others, which means your worth is constantly fluctuating based on who you're comparing yourself to and how you measure up. This manifests in several specific ways. First, you're obsessed with rankings. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Where do you stand? You need to know your position constantly. At work, you track who gets promoted fastest. In your friend group, you monitor who's doing best financially, romantically, socially. You're not just living your life. You're constantly positioning yourself in relation to others. Second, you experience extreme difficulty celebrating others' success. When something good happens to someone else, your first reaction isn't joy, it's threat. Their win feels like your loss. You might intellectually understand that life isn't zero-sum, but emotionally, that's how it feels. So you smile and congratulate them while internally calculating how their success affects your relative standing. Third, you feel secret relief at others' failures. You'd never admit this. You might not even consciously notice it, but when someone else stumbles, part of you feels better. Not because you wish them harm, but because their failure improves your relative position. This is one of the ugliest aspects of the competitor pattern, and it's deeply shameful to recognize in yourself. Fourth, your self-esteem fluctuates wildly based on comparison. One day you feel great because you're ahead of your peers and symmetric. The next day you feel terrible because you discovered someone doing better. Your worth isn't stable because it's not based on internal metrics. It's entirely dependent on external comparison. Fifth, you can't enjoy your own achievements. You hit a goal, and instead of celebrating, you immediately think about who's still ahead of you. You get promoted, and instead of satisfaction, you worry about who got promoted faster. Nothing is ever enough, because there's always someone doing better. The hidden function. Why do people become competitors? Because comparison offers something seductive, a clear metric for worth. In a world where it's hard to know if you're doing well, comparison provides immediate feedback. You just look at who's ahead and who's behind. Simple, clean, no ambiguity. The competitor has internalized a core belief. I am only valuable if I'm better than others. If I'm average or below average, I'm worthless. This belief often forms in environments where comparison was constant. Maybe you had siblings and parents compared you. Maybe you were in highly competitive schools. Maybe your worth was explicitly tied to grades, awards, rankings. You learned. Winning means you're valuable. Losing means you're not. So you organized your life around winning. Every interaction became a competition. Every metric became a scoreboard. You couldn't just do things. You had to do them better than others. This creates enormous anxiety because you can never be safe. There's always someone better. Always someone gaining ground. Always the possibility that you'll fall behind. So you push constantly. Harder. Faster. More. You can't ease up because that's when others catch up. The pattern also persists because it occasionally feels good. Sometimes you are ahead. Sometimes you do win. Sometimes the comparison works in your favor. And that feels fantastic. Your worth is affirmed. You're validated. You matter. These moments of relative superiority keep the pattern alive. You think, see, I just need to keep winning. But you don't see the bigger pattern, that the good feeling never lasts. That someone else's achievement immediately negates your win. That you're in a game that has no finish line. There's no moment where you've won permanently and can finally relax. The cost of comparison. The competitor pattern costs you enormously. First, it costs you joy. You can't enjoy your own life because you're too busy looking at others. Every moment of potential satisfaction is ruined by comparison. You get something good, and instead of appreciating it, you think about who has something better. I remember buying my first nice apartment. I'd worked hard, saved money, finally gotten a place I loved. But instead of enjoying it, I immediately started comparing it to my friends' places. Theirs was bigger, in a better neighborhood, nicer finishes. My joy evaporated. I couldn't appreciate what I had because I was obsessed with what others had. Second, it costs you relationships. The competitor pattern makes genuine friendship nearly impossible because everyone is potentially a rival. You can't be fully happy for them because their success threatens you. You can't be fully vulnerable with them because showing weakness means losing. Your relationships become transactional, strategic, superficial. Third, it costs you authenticity. When life is a competition, you can't pursue what actually matters to you. You have to pursue what wins, what looks impressive, what elevates your status. So you end up chasing goals you don't care about because they're the goals that count in the competition. I spent years pursuing a legal career I didn't care about, partly because it was a high-status profession. I couldn't pursue writing because that didn't rank well in the social hierarchy I was competing in. The competitor pattern forced me into a life shaped entirely by what would make me look good compared to others. Fourth, it costs you your mind. The constant comparison is mentally exhausting. You can't scroll social media without calculating your position. You can't attend social events without sizing everyone up. You can't have a conversation without tracking status markers. Your brain never rests from the competition. Fifth, it costs you perspective. The competitor pattern makes you lose sight of what actually matters. You get so focused on winning that you forget to ask, winning what? Toward what end? For what purpose? You're climbing a ladder without questioning whether it's against the right wall. The breaking point. For most competitors, there's a moment when the pattern becomes untenable. Often, it's when you achieve something you thought would make you feel successful, and it doesn't. You hit the goal, win the prize, reach the level you were striving for, and instead of satisfaction, you feel empty. Because immediately, your brain identifies the next level, the next person to beat, the next achievement to chase. Or sometimes, the breaking point is when comparison makes you do something that violates your values. Maybe you undermine a friend to get ahead. Maybe you celebrate someone's misfortune. Maybe you make a decision solely to beat someone else, not because it's actually right for you. And you realize, this pattern has turned me into someone I don't respect. For me, the breaking point was that dinner. Sitting there, unable to be genuinely happy for a friend, consumed by envy and insecurity. I went home that night and thought, what kind of person have I become? I'm so trapped in comparison that I can't even feel joy for people I love. This has to stop. The path to intrinsic worth. Breaking the competitor pattern requires fundamentally reconceiving worth. Worth isn't relative. It's not determined by how you stack up against others. Worth is intrinsic. You have value simply because you're human, not because of what you achieve, not because of where you rank, just because you exist. This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary for the competitor. Your entire life has been organized around the belief that worth is comparative. Shifting to intrinsic worth means dismantling that entire structure. Start by identifying the specific comparisons you make. Write them down. I compare my salary to my peers. I compare my relationship status to my siblings. I compare my body to people on Instagram. See the pattern. Notice how much energy goes into these comparisons. Then, for each comparison, ask, what is this actually about? Usually, it's not really about the thing itself. It's about needing external validation that you're okay. The competitor uses comparison as a shortcut. Instead of developing internal self-worth, you just check if you're ahead or behind. Next, start questioning the metrics. Who decided these are the things that matter? Career status matters according to whom? Physical attractiveness according to what standard? Financial success compared to which group? Most of the metrics you're competing on are arbitrary. You didn't choose them. You absorbed them from society, family, peers. What if you chose different metrics? Metrics based on your actual values? Instead of comparing career status, what if you measured life by meaningful work? Instead of comparing attractiveness, what if you measured by health and strength? Instead of comparing wealth, what if you measured by financial peace and generosity? The competitor pattern loses power when you realize you're competing in games you never agreed to play, by rules you never consented to, for prizes you don't actually want. Also practice celebrating others. This feels impossible at first. Their success triggers all your insecurity, but force yourself to do it anyway. When someone achieves something, genuinely congratulate them, not performatively. Actually try to feel happy for them. What you'll discover, their success doesn't actually diminish you. Life isn't zero-sum. Someone else winning doesn't mean you lost. There's enough success, happiness, achievement for everyone. This sounds like a platitude, but it's true. And experiencing it viscerally, celebrating someone else, and noticing you're still okay, starts to rewire the competitive pattern. Finally, focus on your own path. Not your path compared to anyone else's. Just yours. What do you actually want? What matters to you? What would you pursue if there was no one to compare yourself to? These questions are difficult for competitors because you've never considered them. You've always been focused on how you measure up, not on what actually matters to you. The transformation. What happens when you break free from the competitor pattern? First, you gain peace. The constant anxiety of comparison dissolves. You're no longer worried about who's ahead or behind. You can finally relax because there's no competition to win. Second, your relationships transform. You can genuinely celebrate others. Be vulnerable with them. Support them without feeling threatened. Real friendship becomes possible because you're no longer viewing everyone as a rival. Third, you gain authenticity. You can pursue what actually matters to you, not what looks impressive, not what wins in some arbitrary competition, what you genuinely care about. This might look less impressive from the outside, but it feels infinitely more meaningful from the inside. Fourth, you can actually enjoy your achievements. When you accomplish something, you can appreciate it without immediately comparing it to what others have done. You can feel satisfied, proud, complete, not because you beat anyone, but because you did something that mattered to you. Fifth, you develop genuine confidence, not the fragile kind that depends on being better than others, but the robust kind that comes from knowing yourself, from living according to your values, from pursuing your path regardless of where it ranks compared to others. The competitor pattern promises worth through winning, but real worth comes from accepting that you're already enough. You don't have to beat anyone. You don't have to prove anything. You can just live. Just be. Just pursue what matters to you without constantly calculating how it compares to others. Chapter 6. Reclaiming your internal compass. So you've recognized the pattern. You see how approval seeking has shaped your life. You understand the costs. Now what? How do you actually break free? How do you shift from external validation to internal values? How do you build a life that's genuinely yours? This is where theory meets practice, where understanding becomes action. And it starts with something most people have never developed, an internal compass. A clear sense of your own values, independent of what others think or expect. Most people don't have this. They've spent so long orienting by external markers that they have no internal direction. They don't know what they value because they've never asked. They've been too busy absorbing everyone else's values. Parents, teachers, peers, society. A cacophony of external voices telling them what matters, what success looks like, what they should want. Breaking free requires developing your own voice. Not louder than others, just clear enough that you can hear it over the noise. Identifying your actual values. Values are what matter to you fundamentally, not what should matter, not what you think matters. What actually matters when you strip away all the social conditioning. This is harder to identify than you'd think because most of what you call your values are actually borrowed. Start by listing what you currently think you value. Write them down. Then, for each one, ask, is this actually mine? Or did I absorb this from someone else? How do I know? For example, you might list career success. But probe deeper. Do you value career success because it's inherently meaningful to you? Or because your parents valued it? Because society rewards it? Because it brings approval? True values feel different from absorbed ones. True values resonate internally. You don't need anyone else to affirm them. They feel right even if no one agrees. Absorbed values require external validation. They only feel valuable when others recognize them. Here's a useful test. Imagine you achieved something that perfectly aligned with one of your stated values, but no one would ever know. You couldn't tell anyone. Couldn't share it, couldn't receive any recognition. Would you still care? If yes, it's probably a true value. If no, if the achievement only matters because others would know, it's likely an absorbed value oriented toward approval. Try this with career success. If you achieved significant career success, but could never tell anyone, never put it on social media, never have anyone acknowledge it, Would it still matter to you? For some people, genuinely yes. The work itself is meaningful regardless of recognition. For others, honestly no. The success only matters because of how it looks to others. Neither answer is wrong, but you need to know which is true for you. Because if you're pursuing goals that only matter when others recognize them, you're still living for external approval. You haven't actually reclaimed your direction. Some values that tend to be genuine: creativity, learning, connection, contribution, autonomy, integrity, growth, beauty, adventure. These can be pursued for their own sake. They're inherently meaningful. Notice how you feel when you engage with them. There's usually a sense of rightness that doesn't depend on others' opinions. Some values that are often absorbed: status, wealth, recognition, perfection, being liked, winning. These can be pursued in healthy ways, but often they're proxies for approval. Investigate honestly. Why do you want these things? What would they give you? Often the answer is validation, proof of worth, others' approval, defining your own metrics. Once you've identified your actual values, you need to define how you'll measure them, because you've been using external metrics your whole life. Salary, title, followers, likes. These are easy to measure and compare, but they don't actually tell you if you're living according to your values. Internal metrics are harder. They're subjective. They can't be compared. They require honest self-assessment, but they're also more accurate measures of whether you're actually living the life you want. For example, if you truly value creativity, the external metric might be: how many people like my work? But the internal metric is: did I express something authentic? Did the process feel enlivening? Am I developing my craft? If you truly value connection, the external metric might be: how many friends do I have? But the internal metric is: do I have relationships where I can be fully myself? Do I feel genuinely known? If you truly value integrity, the external metric might be: do others see me as ethical? But the internal metric is: are my actions aligned with my values? Can I look in the mirror and respect who I see? The shift from external to internal metrics is profound. External metrics keep you trapped in approval seeking because they require others' judgment. Internal metrics free you because they only require your honest assessment. This doesn't mean you never care about external feedback. Feedback is useful, but there's a difference between considering feedback and depending on it, between being informed by others' perspectives and being defined by them. Develop regular practices for checking in with your internal metrics. Weekly reflection: did I act according to my values this week? Monthly assessment: am I moving toward what matters to me? Yearly evaluation: is my life aligned with who I want to be? These aren't questions about whether others approve. They're questions about whether you approve, whether you're living in a way that feels right to you. That's the only metric that actually matters. Building self-trust. Internal validation requires self-trust, and most people don't trust themselves. They've learned that their instincts are wrong. Their preferences are invalid. Their judgment is unreliable. So they constantly seek external input, external validation, external direction. Rebuilding self-trust is a gradual process. It starts with small decisions. Make a choice without asking for anyone's opinion. Notice what happens. Did you survive? Was the outcome terrible? Probably not. Your judgment is more reliable than you've been led to believe. Practice distinguishing between your authentic response and your conditioned response. When something happens, notice your immediate reaction before this shit kicks in. That initial response, before you start filtering it through. What's the appropriate reaction? That's usually more authentic. For example, someone invites you somewhere. Notice your immediate feeling. Do you want to go? Or do you immediately think about whether you should want to go? The first feeling is authentic. The second is conditioning. Start honoring the first feeling more often. If your gut says no, say no. Even if you should say yes. Even if it would look bad to decline. Trust your instinct. Notice that the world doesn't end. That your judgment was valid. Self-trust also requires forgiving yourself. You've made mistakes. You've made choices that didn't work out. You've misjudged situations. That's normal. That's human. It doesn't mean your judgment is fundamentally unreliable. It means you're learning. Stop holding your past mistakes against yourself. Stop using them as evidence that you can't trust yourself. Every human makes mistakes. The difference between people with high self-trust and low self-trust isn't that high-trust people make fewer mistakes. It's that they don't let mistakes destroy their confidence in themselves. Also practice trusting your desires. You want what you want, not what you should want, what you actually want. And those desires are valid. They don't need justification. They don't need to make sense to others. They're yours. For years, I dismissed my desire to write because it wasn't practical, wasn't prestigious, wasn't what I should want, but it was what I wanted. And when I finally started honoring that desire, even though it made no sense to anyone else, I felt alignment I'd never experienced before. Your desires aren't random. They're information about who you are and what matters to you. Stop dismissing them. Stop overriding them with shoulds. Start treating them as valuable data about your authentic self. Developing emotional self-sufficiency. Internal validation also requires emotional self-sufficiency. The ability to manage your own emotional state without depending on others' approval. Most approval seekers are emotionally dependent. They feel good when they get approval, terrible when they don't. Their mood is entirely determined by external feedback. This is exhausting because external feedback is unpredictable. You're always at the mercy of others' opinions. Emotional self-sufficiency means you can feel stable regardless of external circumstances. Not that you're unaffected, you're human, but that your core emotional state doesn't depend on whether others approve. This requires developing several specific capacities. First, the ability to self-soothe. When you're upset, anxious, disappointed, you can comfort yourself. You don't need someone else to make you feel better. You have internal resources to manage difficult emotions. Practice this intentionally. When you feel bad, don't immediately seek external comfort. Don't call someone for reassurance. Don't post something to get validation. Just sit with the feeling. Notice it. Breathe. Remind yourself that feelings are temporary, that you can handle this, that you don't need rescue. Second, the ability to self-motivate. You don't need external praise to feel good about your efforts. You can acknowledge your own progress, appreciate your own work, feel proud of yourself without anyone else recognizing it. This feels weird at first. Celebrating yourself feels like arrogance, but it's not. It's self-sufficiency. You're not dependent on others to tell you when you've done well. You can recognize it yourself. Third, the ability to self-validate. When you make a choice or take a stand, you don't need others to agree in order to feel confident about it. You can validate your own decisions. Trust your own judgment. Stand by your choices even when others disagree. This doesn't mean you're always right. It means you don't crumble when others don't approve. You can consider their perspective without being defined by it. Fourth, the ability to generate your own sense of worth. This is the deepest level of emotional self-sufficiency. Your sense of worth doesn't come from achievements, accomplishments, others' opinions. It comes from simply existing, from being human, from being you. This is philosophical work as much as emotional work. Most of us were taught that worth must be earned, but that's a lie. Worth is inherent. You don't have to do anything to be valuable. You already are. Sit with that. Really sit with it. You are valuable. Right now. Exactly as you are. Not because of what you've done. Not because of what you might do. Just because you are. This is the foundation of emotional self-sufficiency. The practice. Building internal validation isn't a one-time shift. It's a daily practice. Old patterns will resurface. You will catch yourself seeking approval, comparing yourself, performing for others. That's normal. The work is noticing and choosing differently. Each time you notice approval seeking, pause. Ask yourself, what would I do if no one would ever know? What do I actually want here? What aligns with my values? Then choose that, even if it's uncomfortable, even if others won't approve. Choose alignment over approval. Each time you notice comparison, pause. Redirect attention to your own path. What matters is not how you measure up to others. What matters is whether you're living according to your own values, whether you're moving toward what matters to you. Each time you notice performing, pause. Drop the mask. Be authentic, even if it's not impressive, even if it's messy. Real is better than impressive. Always. This is the work, not theoretical understanding. Actual moment-by-moment choices to honor your internal compass over external pressure. It's uncomfortable. You'll face disapproval. People won't understand. Some relationships will end. But each time you choose authentically, you strengthen your internal compass. You prove to yourself that you can trust it, that you can survive disapproval, that freedom is possible. Chapter 7. The Courage to Disappoint. Here's the hard truth. You cannot live authentically without disappointing people. Because living authentically means honoring your own needs, values, and limits. And sometimes those will conflict with what others want from you. This is where most people get stuck. They understand intellectually that they need boundaries. But when it comes to facing someone's disappointment, they fold. Because disappointing others feels unbearable. I remember the first time I set a real boundary with my parents. They planned a family event on a weekend I needed for my own work. Old me would have canceled my plans immediately. New me said, I can't make it. I have something I need to do. The silence on the phone was excruciating. Then came the guilt trip, the disappointment. We thought family was important to you. Every fiber of my being wanted to cave. But I didn't. I held the boundary. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Not because the boundary itself was hard, but because tolerating their disappointment was agonizing. But here's what I learned. Their disappointment didn't kill me. Or them. They were upset for a while. Then they adjusted. And something shifted in our relationship. They started treating my boundaries as real. Started respecting my needs. Because I'd shown them I was serious. Why it's so hard? Disappointing others triggers one of our deepest fears, rejection. Your brain interprets they're disappointed in me as they might reject me. And rejection feels like a survival threat. So disappointing someone triggers an alarm in your nervous system. Cortisol spikes. Anxiety floods in. Your body is screaming danger. This is why intellectual understanding isn't enough. Your body is having a physiological response. You have to learn to tolerate the physical discomfort of disappointing others, to sit with the anxiety without immediately acting to relieve it. The fear is particularly intense with people close to you, because these are the relationships you're most afraid to lose. But here's the paradox. The closer the relationship, the more important boundaries become. Without boundaries, close relationships become enmeshed, codependent, suffocating. Healthy relationships require each person to be a complete individual, and that means sometimes disappointing each other. Not all disappointment is equal. Understanding the different types helps you navigate which disappointments are necessary. Necessary disappointment comes from honoring your legitimate needs. You can't attend every event. Can't help with every request. You have limits. Honoring those limits will sometimes disappoint others. This is the price of being a separate person with your own life. Growth disappointment comes from changing in ways others don't understand. You stop people-pleasing. You pursue a different path. People who knew the old version are disappointed in the new version. This disappointment is actually a sign of growth. Thoughtless disappointment comes from actually being inconsiderate. You cancel plans habitually. You're unreliable. This disappointment is avoidable and signals you need to work on follow-through. There's a difference between necessary boundaries and simply being flaky. The skill is distinguishing between these. Most approval seekers can't. They feel terrible about all disappointment equally. So they avoid disappointing anyone ever, which means they never set necessary boundaries. Building tolerance, building the capacity to disappoint others is gradual. You can't go from people-pleasing to setting boundaries overnight. Start with low-stakes situations. Someone asks if you want to go somewhere you don't want to go. Say no. Just, no, that doesn't work for me. Notice the anxiety. Notice the guilt. But don't act on it. Just let it be there. The person might push back. Are you sure? Hold your ground. I'm sure. Thanks for the invite. Notice they survive your no. Notice you survive their disappointment. Nothing terrible happens. Practice this with increasing stakes. Say no to a family member. Turn down a favor request. Each time, you're teaching your nervous system. Disappointing people isn't dangerous. I can survive this. Handling pushback. When you start setting boundaries, people will push back. They'll employ various tactics. Guilt tripping. After all I've done for you, you can't do this one thing? Don't engage. Simply repeat. I understand you're disappointed, but I can't do that. Questioning, why not? They want you to justify your no. Don't. You don't owe detailed explanations. I have other commitments is sufficient. Anger. Fine. I'll just do it myself. They're punishing you, hoping you'll cave. Don't. I'm sorry you're upset, but my answer is still no. Manipulation. You've changed. This is accurate. You have changed. And that's good. You're right, I have changed. I'm learning to honor my own needs. The key is not to engage deeply with pushback. Don't justify. Don't apologize excessively. State your boundary clearly and hold it calmly. The more you engage, the more you signal your boundary is negotiable. Relationship recalibration. When you start setting boundaries, relationships will recalibrate. Some will improve. Some will end. This is painful but necessary, because relationships built on you having no boundaries aren't genuine relationships. Some people will adjust. They'll be initially surprised, but will ultimately respect your boundaries. These relationships can deepen. Now there's space for genuine reciprocity. Some people will pull away. They like the old version better, the version that said yes to everything. Now that you have boundaries, the relationship isn't useful to them anymore. This hurts, but it's clarifying. You learn who was in relationship with you versus who was using you. And some will fight hard. They'll escalate the guilt, the anger, the manipulation. These are often the closest relationships because the stakes feel highest. Your boundaries threaten the dynamic they've relied on. With these people, you can hold your boundaries and work through the conflict, or the relationship might end. Either outcome is better than going back to the old pattern. The recalibration is painful. You'll lose some relationships. You'll disappoint people who matter. But on the other side, you have something precious. Relationships where you can actually be yourself. Where your needs matter. Where there's genuine reciprocity. The freedom. Once you've developed the capacity to disappoint others, something remarkable happens. You become free. Free to be yourself within relationships. Free to honor your needs without crippling guilt. Free to set boundaries without constant anxiety. This freedom transforms everything. You can say yes when you actually mean yes. which makes your yes meaningful. You can help people without resentment because you're choosing to help, not complying out of fear. Your relationships become authentic. The people in your life are there because they appreciate who you actually are, not because you're meeting their needs at the expense of your own. The freedom doesn't come all at once. It's gradual. Each boundary set, each disappointment tolerated, each relationship recalibrated. Slowly, you build capacity to live authentically even when others don't approve. And that capacity, that's freedom. That's what living for yourself instead of others actually means. You know the theory now. You understand the mechanics. You see the path. But knowledge isn't transformation. Understanding isn't freedom. Most people who read books like this do nothing. They close the book and return to exactly the life they were living before. Same patterns, same people-pleasing, same approval-seeking. Because understanding doesn't require courage. Change does. Living for yourself isn't a destination you reach. It's a continuous practice. Old patterns will resurface. The difference is awareness. Now you can see when you're sacrificing your needs for approval, when you're performing instead of being authentic. So here's where we end. But really, this is where it begins. What will you do today? Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today. That moves you toward living for yourself. Write it down. Make it specific. One concrete action. Today. Then do it. This is your life. The only one you get. Every day you spend performing for others is a day you can never reclaim. You've spent enough time living for others. It's time to live for yourself. The choice is yours. The life is yours. The freedom is yours. Walk.